how India is bracing for an Afghanistan crisis fallout, and India already has gone flooded with refugee requests, Abhishek. Fill us in on that.
Well, yes, that comes from sources, Deepthi, and remember last time it happened in mid-90s when the Taliban captured power for the first time. We had their president also, Najibullah, seeking asylum, political asylum in India. So it happens from the top, but as of now, it's about people who have facilitated Indian projects, people who are marked out, like in the case of United States and other nations who were working on the development aspect of Afghanistan. India also has pumped in almost $3 billion worth of development projects, and hence a lot of people worked with Indian projects. There was cooperation, facilitation, and those people could be possible targets of Taliban and could be, targeted in general. So in that sense, overall, the situation, the way it is emerging in Afghanistan, it's becoming a refugee crisis, not just for India, for around the world, but then India, because we were involved in development projects like not many other nations. So that could be one issue for us also to handle. That's what sources in the government are telling us, and that's why they are working on some modus vivendi by which some of these people who could be serious targets of Taliban could be, brought to India in some ways. So an ad hoc immigration policy, so to say, could be worked for these Afghans, and they could be brought here. Remember, there is already an Afghan colony in India, in Delhi, and some other pockets spread across the country. And this had happened in the first wave of migration. That happened when the first Taliban capture of power had happened in Kabul. And if the same really pans out as is now so visibly happening, then obviously the government of India would also need to have some ways of accommodating a few of those people, if not in many thousands, in a few thousands, of course. So as for the rest of the world and for those nations who had helped Afghanistan, India also bracing for a refugee crisis, and the government working on ways to get some of them, absorbing some of them, those who are compatible culture-wise, those who have been friends of India, to accommodate them in Indian society, like we have done in the past as well, Deepthi.
Oh, yes, Abhishek, I think that's a very important perspective that you're getting from New Delhi. Why don't you just stay on with us? Let me get in also General G.D. Bakshi Saab now. General Bakshi, how do you read what is happening right now? The entire world today is stunned with the pace that the Taliban has begun to move. There are estimates, sir, that indicate that almost 95% of the country right now has been captured by the Taliban.
Well, yes, you see, the simple fact is that the Americans had calculated that the Afghan army they had raised and trained would be able to hold for 6 to 8 months at least, and there would be a decent, gap between the takeover of Kabul and the Americans, and they would not have to repeat the Saigon scene of hanging onto the rails of helicopters as they were flown out and as the Vietnamese were closing in. Unfortunately, that is precisely the way it has happened. The Americans insisted that the combat experienced Uzbeks and Tajiks were kept out of the Afghan armed forces. They insisted no Soviet-era weapons would be used. They would create a fresh new army. I'm very sorry to state that the performance of the fresh new Afghan army has been pathetic. City fighting, you can hold on for months. If you are really determined to fight, you can hold on for months. Unfortunately, the Afghan is a very good guerrilla fighter. He is a very poor regular fighter. So they have just collapsed without a struggle, without a fight, and it has created the same disaster that the Americans were trying to avoid. I'm sorry the Americans haven't covered themselves with glory in this. It is making very poor spectacle and theatre on the media screens, the world over, of America's loss of will to fight, and the kind of way the ragtag outfit like the Taliban seems to be behaving like great conquerors. They are also presenting targets. I would say don't be surprised by the twists and turns that the situation in Afghanistan takes. If you see the history of Afghanistan, there have been surprising turnarounds and twists and turns. So I would say that though the present government seems to be almost gone, I am sure the way the Taliban cadre is behaving. Firstly, Pakistan has ensured that all its recruits from the madrasas, the young hotheads, are not listening to the Taliban command. That is quite clear and obvious. They are giving very bad press to this thing in a hope that they can terrify the whole world, by beating up the poor women of Afghanistan, by killing, unarmed civilians, hanging them and torturing them, etc., etc. They are past masters at that. They are not very good stand-up fighters. Even now, I would very strongly recommend to the American armed forces that they are out in dense clustered targets. Before they get into the cities, they must be hit with air power. We must see that the Northern Alliance, the old Northern Alliance, is revived. It can be revived. So I don't think we should now start getting into a surrender mode and how best we can please the Taliban now somehow. You can try all you want. The Taliban will remain the Taliban. They were raised by Pakistan. They have been trained, equipped by Pakistan. They are being supported by Pakistan. Even in the previous battles of the Taliban, a whole lot of money was given to opposing commanders to just lay down their arms and end up without a fight. I'm not sure if the same is not happening now, because the way the Afghan army was 3 lakh strong. The Taliban are about 80,000 strong. Even if you have 20,000 Pakistanis, the military equation didn't add up. So this is a disgraceful performance by the Afghan army. I mean, as a military man, I have to say that it is disgraceful. Nothing short of disgraceful, but that is what it is. The Americans didn't raise this army properly. They should have made use of the Uzbek cadres, the Tajik cadres who had battle experience. They have put all greenhorns there, and these greenhorns haven't stood up to even 2 days of hard-on fighting. That's not the way armies fight. It is a pathetic performance. They have changed about 6 army chiefs and 6 interior ministers in the last few days, so there is no established chain of command any longer. It's sad. It's extremely sad. But I don't think we should, panic unduly. Wait and watch. Afghanistan has a lot of twists and turns. Yes, all those Afghans who helped you and who are seeking refuge, it is our duty to give them refuge. It is our duty to give those Afghans who helped us, who worked with us for the civilian projects. If they need shelter, if they need refuge, it is our duty to provide that refuge. We can't wash our hands off them. And we should get them out in our planes, which are getting out.
I think, General Bakshi, sir, you've touched a lot of important points. Yes, and like it was said, that America actually did not have an exit strategy. They only wanted to exit. I also want to say good evening to Sriram. And before we take our first break here on the broadcast and later return also to Shersha, Sriram, how do you view what is happening right now? Taliban is closing in right now in Kabul. But also, Kabul is a place where you have the maximum concentration right now of the Afghan forces. How do you see the next few hours panning out?
Well, Deepthi, the analogy nearest one that one can think of is of Syria, because the urban warfare, has not been a feature of the Afghan landscape for some time. So now, if they're closing in on Kabul, there will be resistance. Like you said, the defensive formations are there, and there is also limited air support, but it's there. So I think destruction of the entire urban infrastructure, the last time we saw it in Afghanistan was in the 1990s, during the so-called Afghan civil war, before the rise of Taliban. So that kind of devastation beckons, and it's not a good sign at all. If the foreigners are all going to be evacuated, that leaves also very little leverage for international community to do anything there. So in this kind of scenario, preventing a bloodbath is important. And I think, of course, like General Bakshi was saying, the incompetence of the Afghan leadership and of the Afghan military has been exposed. and we should not be, imposing any false hopes that they can somehow retrieve the situation. What can happen, and what I believe is going to happen, is Taliban takeover kind of is happening now. It's a de facto takeover. It will not have international recognition except the same old, Pakistan and possibly China, but rest of the world is not going to recognize them, and there will be resistance to their rule. The very harsh, extreme Islamist jihadist rule that they have imposed in the past. It seems to be worse now, Deepthi. I just spoke to people from Kandahar this morning. They were saying in the past, Taliban were not demanding young women to be taken as so-called, wives or sex slaves. But now they are doing it because they are imitating what ISIS was doing in Syria and in Iraq. So some of what General Bakshi was calling hotheads, they are actually extremely angry, frustrated young men who have been, indoctrinated and brainwashed to believe that the emirate, the Islamic emirate they're talking about, they want to establish, is nothing but a sister of the caliphate that ISIS wanted. So it's a very dangerous thing. Counter-terrorism is something, Deepthi, we must all engage in now. We cannot save the ground battles and we cannot bring back the provinces that are lost. That is for the Afghan people. But counter-terrorism missions, US, India, I think our air power should be involved in some form, in the coalition. So we all need to also watch out for these external spillovers of these dangerous trends that we are seeing now.
Oh, absolutely. A very, very severe humanitarian crisis. Sriram, General Bakshi, and Sher Shah. We are quickly heading into a break, gentlemen. But I request all of you to stay with us as a non-stop rolling coverage of